Hello, hello. If you are in the back of the room, if you could make your way in, that would be great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. My name is Kat Pline. I'm the Director of Development and Communications at Forth. We hope you're enjoying. Thank you. Who gave a woo? Thank you. I see. Oh, was that Stefani? Hey, that's a woo. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying the first day of the conference. You're making connections with other folks and taking advantage of the sessions and exhibit hall. But one item of business that's really important that before I pass it over to our keynote sponsor, some of you may have noticed that there was a demonstration by the catering staff in the convention center this afternoon. Just this afternoon, we learned from the convention center that the union that represents the catering staff is actively negotiating a new contract with the OCC's catering company. As an organization that centers racial equity and cares deeply about ensuring workers have good, supportive jobs, we want to take a moment to thank the folks who are nourishing our bodies this week, express our gratitude for their work, and express our hope that their negotiations are successful. So a round of applause for the folks who are nourishing us this week. Thanks, y'all. So it's my pleasure to introduce the sponsor who will introduce this afternoon's keynote speech. Welcome Aaron Luque, CEO and founder of EnviroSpark, and thank you for your support.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Luque, founder and CEO of EnviroSpark. For those of you who don't know us, we're a national turnkey provider of all things electric vehicle charging. So everything from engineering, design, installation, hardware, software, construction, operations, maintenance, you name it. If it involves refueling an electric car, we do it. To date, we've installed 7,000 plus stations across the country, and we serve some of the nation's largest utilities, EV OEMs, and most recently, proud to say it, federal government in these endeavors. So it is and always has been our mission to make charging accessible to everyone. And that is our mission as an organization. When we say everyone, I mean, we mean everyone, which is why we're so excited to be sponsoring this particular topic and this particular session. As a minority-owned business, it's this topic of discussion is near and dear to our hearts. And I'm honored to present and introduce our next guest. She's a leading voice in the transportation policy sector on areas of equity and equality. And I'd like to welcome Tamika Butler to the stage. So join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I come from black people, so when they say something to you, you got to say it back. So good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. All right, thank you. I have about 20 minutes with you and 70 slides, and no one thinks I can do it, but I can. And so I'm going to jump right in. And I want to talk a little bit about how I think of transportation and electrification and equity. And really, for me, it comes down to justice. And so I like to tell people what I'm going to tell them before I tell them, so that right when they're getting bored, they can think back to this slide and be like, okay, well, she's almost done. I don't want to be rude. I'll just sit here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to do a little bit of the traditional keynote storytelling. And then I'm going to try to talk about some words that often come up when we talk about equity, and then talk about power and privilege. And so first, to start out with, who am I? My name's Tamika, as you heard. I have my own consulting company, Tamika L. Butler Consulting. As you can tell, I'm not great with creativity, and so that's what it's called. I do a lot of different work for different types of clients on a number of different issues. I help government entities write reports. I do freelance writing for popular magazines. I do a lot on micromobility and tech. But I'm also, because I have so much free time, a second-year PhD student in the UCLA Urban Planning Program, focusing on transportation. Thank you. That's the first time anybody's ever clapped for me. It's usually just my wife saying, "What are you doing again?" And so I am getting a PhD. I'm interested in things that are all related to transportation and the relationship between transportation and poverty and race. This is probably my most text-heavy slide. And I always tell people when they say, "So what are you doing in your PhD program?" And basically, I'm like Issa at the Emmys. I'm just rooting for everybody black, right? I just fundamentally believe that if my folks can get free, we can all get free. I also like to think about why I do this work. I have one professor who, whenever she asks us about our work, she always says, "But what's at stake?" Like, don't just be in a PhD program in some ivory tower, or don't just be at a nonprofit, or don't just go get a government job and not know why you're doing it. What's at stake? And for me, my real purpose are my family members, right? My wife and my kids. I'm the mother of 2 black kids, and sometimes there is nothing scarier in this society. All of us who are parents know that school isn't the safe haven we used to think it could be. But as a black person, I can die at the grocery store. I can die walking in my neighborhood with a hoodie on, eating Skittles. Anything could end my life. And so I really do work focused on mobility because I want my kids to be able to move through the world, or frankly, stay wherever they want, stay right in place in ways that I haven't gotten to experience. As I go through this keynote, I would love for you to just think about kind of these big questions, right? One of the things I love about keynotes is that no one can interrupt me and I just get to talk and just pretend I'm important. But one of the hardest parts is after keynotes, there's not usually a Q&A, and so you don't really get to see how people are processing the information. And so I'll ask that you just think about these questions and think about what your role is in this work and what you're doing to either uphold or dismantle different things. And if something is going to kind of float in your mind and stay there, how can you make sure when you leave this space, as you're at happy hour, as you're at your kitchen table, whatever it may be, when you're still thinking about this, how are you going to process it and say, I could keep exploring this, I can keep doing this work? So how did I get to this place where I am a person who gets on stage and talks about transportation? For me, it started in San Francisco. I was in Nebraska, where I went to college and where I went to high school, where my parents met in high school. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I'm black, I'm gay, I'm not Midwestern, I have to get out of here. And so I went to the gayest city there was, San Francisco, but I didn't realize that Stanford wasn't in San Francisco, it was in Palo Alto, and that is not the gayest place ever. But I was there, I got a law degree, and then I got a job after law school, and it was to start a workers' rights clinic to focus on race discrimination for black folks. And my job was to go into the historically black communities of San Francisco, one of them being Bayview Hunters Point, and talk to them about the employment discrimination they were facing. And when I got there, the T line of the San Francisco Muni had just opened. And no one could trust me as a lawyer until they knew my politics on this transit line. Because a lot of folks in the community felt like it wasn't transit that was planned for them. They felt like it was transit that was planned to get 49ers fans over to Candlestick Park when it was still there, and not really about connecting them to the rest of the city. And that's when, as an employment lawyer, I learned how important transportation is. The former mayor of LA, newly ambassador of India, barely, but he made it, he used to say that transportation is the prism through which we should see all other social justice issues. That if you are not able to be mobile, you cannot be economically mobile. If you need a good job, good healthcare, good education, if you can't get there, then what do we have? And that's when I fell in love with transportation. Eventually, I moved to LA, and I decided I wanted to get a job doing something I loved, riding my bike. And so I got a job at the LA County Bicycle Coalition. Do I have any folks in here who identify as like hardcore cyclists? I was expecting more for Portland. Hardcore cyclists, we're good people, we're very nice, but also sometimes take ourselves a little too seriously. So the beginning of this article is from a very popular bike blog in LA, and it says, "Finally, we see white smoke rising above the downtown headquarters of the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition." So that's how bike people are. They're comparing me being hired to a new pope being selected. I had no idea what I was in for. I was just like this black kid who liked to ride my bike, who was a little stressed out from the legal world and was like, so I just get to ride my bike and pass out lights? This is great. And it was great. It was the best job I ever had. I got to go to work every day in a wrinkled shirt. I got to help launch really important initiatives with diverse coalitions of people. I was the head of the Bike Coalition when LA became a Vision Zero city. I got to hang out with the mayor all the time. I was the head of the Bike Coalition when we started Bike Share in LA, which was very exciting. And then with the mayor's leadership and vision, I was part of a coalition that passed a ballot measure to tax ourselves that would never sunset, and it was the first time a ballot measure ever specifically had money for active transportation. So it was great. And then to top it all off, I was in LA. So I got to ride my bike to award shows like the Emmys with producers for Mad Men and other shows. It was a pretty sweet job. But there was this problem. Even though I was working at this bike organization, I was still queer. I was still black. And that's how I saw the world. I couldn't do it any other way. And every time I wanted to talk about race and mobility spaces, I felt like LeBron being told just to dribble. I'm not as good as LeBron, but you know. I was just like, Tamika, just talk about bikes. No one wanted to talk about race. And maybe we've come a long way, but maybe we haven't, right? And what I would always explain to people as I was doing bike work is that everything is about race. And it's not always about race because people of color make it about race. We're often not the ones in power creating the institutions that create the forms that make me check a box, right? But as a black person, I know that racism has always been part of the built environment. I've always been told where I can and can't go. I've been part of communities that are constantly on the outside of the fence looking in, wondering why we don't have access to the same parks and green space, right? Our national park system, this guy, Madison Grant, is called by many one of the forefathers of the national park system, a park system that is predicated on stealing land from indigenous people, putting up fences around it, and charging us to get back in. This is a book that Hitler said was like a Bible to him because of the way it talked about the way that people of color are diluting the human race. So the built environment and being outside has always been fraught for folks of color. We know when people see our communities and look at maps, this is what they see. We know that when there's an adverse land use, it's most often in our communities. I live next to Baldwin Hills. I just saw a list that Baldwin Hills is the second most affluent black community in the country. It is also home to the largest active residential oil drilling site. It is not because those folks don't have money. It's because they're black, right? We know, and we now have a Secretary of Transportation who will say loudly that highways are some of the most racist things we have ever done as a country. We know which communities are part of those alleyways full of pollution where kids have to do recess outside surrounded by pollution. Those of us who are folks of color and have those other boxes that we check, we understand intersectionality. I always tell transportation planners, if a client came to you and said, people keep dying at this intersection, can you fix it? And you said, you know, I could, but it's an intersection. There's lights, there's cars, there's people. Can I just go mid-block and make a parklet? That would be easier. The client would say, no, we want you to fix the things that are tough. And we have to do this work at the intersections. Because the reality is, in our country, race has always been a part of everything. It's been a part of our transportation story since Sister Parks was like, nah, not today, right? It's very much a part of our prison system. It's a part of our environmental policies and environmental racism. It's a part of our schooling. We're putting our son in kindergarten for the first time, and we were talking to another black parent, and she said, you have options. You can either go to a predominantly black school or you can go to a good school, because that's how segregated our education system is. And then when it comes to urban planning, I think about this book. This book got super popular during the pandemic. It was on the top of all the bestsellers lists. If you haven't read it, you should read it. I've been on panels with Richard. He seems great. But even this book about zoning, it, for me, points out the ways in which sometimes in our mobility and transportation and built environment work, we still center whiteness. And what do I mean by centering whiteness? The subtitle of this book is A Forgotten History of How the United States, of how our government segregated America. And the reality is, forgotten to who? For black folks who can't pass down generational wealth, they haven't forgotten. For indigenous folks who were put into schools and then sectioned off onto reservations, they haven't forgotten. So sometimes even the language we use centers one particular perspective. And that is why intersectionality, as I've already said, is so important. We have to understand that we're all coming to this work holding different identities, different life experiences, and different perspectives, and they're all valuable. We all have to do this work. Not just the folks of color, not just the queer folks, not just the folks with disabilities. We all have to take on this thing we call equity. But again, when you say that, people start looking confused, like Kanye wondering what happened to his Adidas contract, right? And no one wants to talk about that. People are like, oh, race, it makes me uncomfortable, what do I do? And I always say, well, the people we theoretically are serving, they have no other option. Because for them, it feels like every single day they are confronted in a visceral way with how their neighborhood is killing them. And that's why we can't be inactive when it comes to justice. We have to start putting justice into action. And for me, that looks like understanding that we can't just show up to a meeting and say, I'm just here to talk about electrification. You're worried about gentrification and housing prices? That's not me, right? Because for the folks we're serving, they don't have these single issue lives. And because of that, there is no single issue struggle. The reality is, I said I would come here and speak today. Look, electrification crowds aren't always my favorite crowds. I mean, you're all very nice. But electrification spaces are pretty male heavy, pretty white heavy. And I wasn't sure. And I have some friends at Force, so that helped. But also, there is this understanding from this organization that there are some real barriers to entry when it comes to doing this work equitably, right? And more than that, there's this acknowledgement that there has been past harm. And we can't just move forward and pretend the past harm hasn't happened. When we do work that involves going into communities, that involves culture change, that involves shifting how we do something that is so core to what people think is American, getting in the car and driving, We have to realize that if we are not working to dismantle past harms, we are doing nothing but solidifying and perpetuating them. And that's why, in particular, we have to center historically oppressed communities, right? Because they have the most to gain from all of the work you all are doing in this room, but they also have the most to lose. There's also this opinion, just like I said, what are electrification spaces like? There's this narrative that electrification is this luxury that's for certain groups of people and not for everyone. And I hope part of why you're here is to help change that narrative. And that's super important in this particular moment. All of a sudden, we have this cute little Secretary of Transportation who likes to ride bikes. He likes trains. He has an adorable husband who will pop off on you on Twitter if you talk about his husband taking leave. He has a family, and he really seems to get transportation, right? He seems to get that we have to focus on infrastructure. We have to focus on the way that people get around, that people live, that people can be. And they got some money behind it, right? So this moment, thinking about equity is more important than ever, because if we're gonna have the resources to make generational changes, generational shifts, we have to make sure that everyone can be a part of that. And that requires some shared language. There's a researcher out of Minnesota who I once heard speak, and he said, equity is like the color blue. Everyone's saying it, but are we all talking about the same thing? Are you talking about sky blue? Are you talking about electric blue? Are you talking about turquoise, right? If you're the kind of person who likes that, you should try the game Hues and Cues. Horrible, but fun. And so we have to share language. So when I think of folks saying, we care about DEI, we care about DEI, we care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're using those words interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable. This is what diversity is. It is a clip art picture from the 90s where you get as many diverse faces as possible. You put the white guy in the back and you tell him to pretend he can't see. You will somebody in a wheelchair up front, and then you sprinkle it with lots of women. This is diversity, right? Just a lot of different faces. That is different than inclusion. And we can't get to equity if we don't have inclusion. When you have a diverse organization, are those diverse people in the decision-making positions? Can they say yes or no to a program? Can they determine where budget dollars go? If they don't have power, then that's not true inclusion. And this is the picture everyone loves to use to visually understand, if you are a visual learner, the difference between equity and equality, right? You might not get a box, but that's okay because you were already ahead and you don't need it. I hate that picture because it's not accurate. It doesn't show where we're really starting, and it doesn't show where we should be getting. Why are we just trying to help people see over the fence? In fact, I would argue that this picture doesn't do us justice. What if you hate baseball? Everyone is not as lucky enough to live in LA and cheer for the Dodgers. What if you want to play in the game, to coach the team, to own the team? What if you're a budding entrepreneur and you want to set up the charging stations outside and have an exclusive deal with Major League Baseball? At some point, we have to give people the ability to self-determine. And that's how you put equity into practice, right? You understand that there are different types of equity. You define them and you get on the same page. And then you acknowledge that power is always a part of it. You cannot talk about equity without talking about power. And power is just not a sword that He-Man wields over people. You have to start thinking about, how do you have power with people? Kat and I were in a program together where someone taught us the phrase co-power, right? That sometimes power is about acknowledging that the people in the community already have the power. I was at a panel earlier today where they said the people closest to the problem are usually closest to the solution. And so I always tell people, don't empower me. I can decide if I feel empowered. But you aren't the only one colonizer with power to come in and bestow it upon me. We have to see power in communities and co-power. And then we have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to make sure that there are things in place to make sure that there is meaningful participation, and then we hold people accountable. I have 20 seconds, and so I will just say, when you're working in community, partnership is the answer. But all partnership isn't created equal. The real thing we have to do as those who have resources and means and power is figure out how to have strong community partnerships and strong coordination on our teams. We want to cut some of the red tape. Community hates it when they show up for 3 different meetings with 3 different groups of people who are asking them very similar questions. And we're no longer in a world where partnerships can't happen. You have to make sure when you work with community, they are not just an afterthought. And you can't just do the thing to get the money and then leave and move on. We have people who don't like to talk about equity because it doesn't feel like a safe space to them. But I always say, there is no safe place for Black folks in America. In order to be my authentic self, I have to be brave. So you have to get past being scared. People don't want to be called racist. I get it. And especially in places like California and Oregon, they're like, oh, but I compost. I can't be racist, right? You have to be brave enough to get it wrong, to make a mistake, and to keep going. You have to, in case you're not figuring it out, I'm saying it again, you have to be brave. You will mess up, and you will feel horrible when you mess up. But Taylor Swift, I got you. I don't got the tickets, but I got you. When you make a mistake, you gotta kind of shake it off and keep going. You have to reflect on what you've done wrong. You definitely need to atone. People underestimate the power of saying sorry. And you gotta move on and do the work. You cannot do that without understanding power and privilege. 3 quick things I always say to people. Create that brave space where people are okay saying the wrong thing and knowing that you're going to support them and help them through it, and that there will be accountability. Then understand the role that power plays. If you are starting a new project, ask yourself, who stands to be most impacted by this project, whether it's good or bad? And then look around that decision-making table. Are they there? And if they're not, there is a power imbalance. And then you have to question the privileges that allowed certain people to be at the table. Was it the time of the meeting? Was it the location of the meeting? Was it some credentialing? Was it a key? When you confront power and privilege, that's when you can do equity work. I will end by saying that this is a book I had to read for class called Reconsidering Reparations. This is a young scholar at Georgetown, a philosophy professor, and he uses our climate crisis to talk about reparations. And what he says is, we can't get caught up in fault, right? We all have relatives and ancestors who were part of creating our global, racist, capitalist society. What side, who knows? But we were all a part of it in some way. All we have to do is figure out what our role is. What is our work? Who do we want to uplift? Who do we want to center? And then he says, just like his ancestors, we don't have to solve that problem in a day. All we have to do is move forward. Just do our part and ask yourself every single day, what's at stake and what kind of ancestor do I want to be? Thank you.
Okay, one more round of applause for Tamika. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope everyone takes away that let's just do the work. So thank you. All right, our formal programming today has come to a close. We're at the end of day 1, so we're going to continue tomorrow. Breakfast is here in this room at 8. And we have opening remarks at 9, followed by a plenary electric transportation in the Global South. And then also 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. If you are an early riser and you want to come hang out and talk about things, the Rocky Mountain Institute, the North American Council of Freight Efficiency, and the U.S. Department of Energy are hosting a breakfast session for an informal discussion on the critical benefits and challenges of electrifying trucks. You can join the discussion in meeting room A105, 106, and if you don't want to commit that to memory, I'm pretty sure it's in Hoover, but come see a fourth person if you need some help. All right, so before reception, want to say, hey, we've earned one. This evening's networking reception is sponsored by Advanced Energy United and the Heising-Simons Foundation. Thank you both for your support. Ryan Galantine, the Policy Director for Advanced Energy United, has a brief messages for us before we head to the reception. So, Ryan, stage is yours.
Can we get another round of applause for the 4th staff for putting together an amazing day 1 of this conference, and for all the speakers that spoke here today. It was an incredible day. My name is Ryan Galantine. I'm the Policy Director for Electrifying Transportation at Advanced Energy United. I have the coveted last spot between here and a drink, but the good news is that I'm here to tell you about refreshments. So, Advanced Energy United is a business association of clean energy companies working to advance 100% clean energy and clean transportation systems. And the cool thing about working at a business association is I get to meet and to work with an enormous array of different companies, people working to address our climate crisis, and it's by far the best part of my job. So I want to echo something that Jeff said this morning, which is that a big value of a conference like this is the opportunity to kind of step outside of your normal routine, talk to somebody you don't know, get some new ideas. So please join us in the exhibit hall right next door behind you for a refreshment. Say hi to somebody you don't know. Say hi to somebody, strike up a conversation, and see if you can find out something that you didn't know when you started your day. And we have a booth, happy to talk more about our policy and advocacy work. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. See you out there.